Hello guys! In today's video I would like to share with you 5 hot opening traps where you can win your opponent's queen very quickly. And these are just the little known traps as they come from my own repertoire. So the trap number 1 starts as a modern Scandinavian and with quite a common setup from white with knight to c3 and then bishop to c4, we can reach this position where we can play this weird bishop to e6. And from here, the most common line from white is going to get their queen trapped, just like this. Queen goes to f3, putting more pressure on the knight, but we play knight to b4. I call this the Eval gambit, as we are not gambiting any material, but Stockfish hates this position, so we are gambiting our position actually. From here, most guys are going to correctly capture the bishop, and after we recapture, here is where most guys are going to play a mistake of queen captures on b7, thinking they are probably winning some material, which they don't, because we can play knight to c6 and suddenly everything is protected and we are maintaining our threat of the fork. So most guys here get tunnel visioned against this and they try to hold on to the c-pawn, not realizing that we have even a stronger threat, and that is a rook to b8 trapping the queen. So the downside of this trap is that you have to play a risky opening, which doesn't really work on a master level. And I am Monkey King, could say a thing or two about this. And on the scale of hot, I rate this trap just steaming, not really on fire. Okay, let's rewind this and let's switch to white pieces. The next trap is going to happen after the Alekhine defense. Here actually from the beginning, the most played moves by black are going to get their queen trapped, like this. We push pawn to e5 to harass the knight, and then we push pawn to d4. Most guys will play pawn to d6, and we are going to play bishop to c4 to hit the knight. Knight goes to b6 to counter hit the bishop, and we place it on b3. Here most guys are going to capture the pawn, and we don't mind, we just develop knight to f3. I call this the meat gambit. So most guys are going to be capturing another pawn, and here you can play either pawn to c3 or even the barbaric knight to c3. Both of these moves should do the job, because after you put anything on c3, most guys are going to capture it, falling for the trap, and now we can capture on f7, force the king to capture our bishop, and we are winning the queen like this. So the downside of this trap is probably it will only work in blitz or bullet. Haven't really tried this in longer time control. And on the scale of hot, I rate this caught on a bonfire. Alright, let's rewind and switch back to black pieces. In this trap we will be facing the queen's pawn game. This was recently featured on my channel and I call this the Jigsaw gambit. There are a bunch of move orders how to get the desired position, but basically it is going to be looking like this. And now we can play a gambit with pawn to e5. So from here again most played line will get their queen trapped. So most guys capture on e5, we recapture with our knight, and here they are grabbing the pawn on d5 as well. We develop the bishop to d6 to set our trap, and the most played move here is knight to f3. We are going to capture this knight, and look at this, 91% of the time people recaptured using their queen, which is a blunder because bishop to g4 happens to trap the queen and win us the game. The downside of this trap is that it is a pain in the chess to get this gambit on the board, but once you do, the positions are totally amazing and super interesting, even if they don't fall for this queen trapping line. Okay, let's switch back to white. In this one we are going to be facing e4, e5, knight to f3 and queen to f6, the McConnell defense. Once again, I'll show you a line where most time they are going to get the queen trapped, and we start with bishop to c4. They go bishop to c5, and after knight to c3, most guys are playing pawn to c6 because they want to obscure the knight from jumping in. Well, here we push pawn to d4, and since they don't want to give up the dark square bishop, most guys are going to capture the pawn with their pawn, but we push pawn to e5 and hit the queen. Now the queen should be going somewhere back, but most guys are going to play queen to g6 because it looks like they are having so much pressure against the knight and the g2 pawn, so they should be winning something, right? Well, turns out the queen is running short on squares, and knight to h4 trap the queen right on the spot. The downside of this opening trap is the higher your rating, the less likely you are to face the McConnell defense. But on the scale of hot, I rate this like caught on big fire. This was actually the first trap I ever invented. Okay, let's rewind and let's switch to black pieces. For the last trap, we are going to be facing the English opening. And conveniently enough, even from the beginning, the most common replies by white are going to get their queen trapped. So we go pawn to e5, knight to c3, and here we can play the Trojan gambit with pawn to d5. Usually they capture, and after c6 they are capturing both of these pawns. We capture with our knight, and here most guys are going to continue their developing plan with this light square bishop fianchetto. Well, we go knight to f6, bishop to g2, and after bishop to c5, most guys are going to play pawn to e3 because they don't want to allow any nonsense with our dark square bishop, right? Well, here we can play bishop to f5, and 76% of the time people are going to play knight g to e2. Well, here we have a strong move, knight to b4, and we are looking for this fork. So of course most guys naturally are going to try to save the forking with getting short castled. But here we shock them with bishop to c2. We hit the queen is forced to move, and now knight to d3 traps the queen in this funny manner. The downside of this trap, well, there are no downsides. And on scale of hot, I rate this super hot, caught on fire and lava. Alright guys, since you made it this far into my video, let me reward you with some bonus queen traps that I have discovered only recently. So let's switch back to white pieces. In this one we are going to play e4 and we will be facing the Sicilian defense. Well, my favorite weapon against Sicilian is the wing gambit with b4. So if they capture, knight to f3, then knight to c6, and after d4 it is only the fourth most played move. But if you ever encounter pawn to g6, know about this trap. You can play pawn to d5, and already most guys are going to play a mistake, knight to b8, and this is super nice position for white. But the critical move is the second most played one, bishop to g7. So with this move, black is counter-hitting our rook. Well, what we can do here is we can block this diagonal with pawn to c3, and already if you listen closely you can hear your opponent calculating. They can actually hang the knight and just capture this pawn. Because after we capture the knight, most guys here are going to play pawn to c2, which attacks our queen, and the rook is hanging again. But we are going to simply capture the pawn, and now everyone is happily taking the rook and get hit with pawn to c7, trapping their queen on its home square with a pawn. What a ridiculous trap this. Alright, and for the last one, let's switch back to black pieces. So recently I've been analyzing pawn to e4 and e5 openings, and I really enjoyed this line against the king's gambit, where you go knight to c6, and the only good move here for white is to go knight to f3, and now you hit them with pawn to f5. This is the Miles defense, and again there is a line which is the most common one and is getting their queen trapped. Well, most guys here are capturing on f5. You push e4 to harass the knight goes to e5, and now we play knight to f6. So here most guys are going to develop bishop to c4, because this is what they are used to be doing in the king's gambit, just hitting f7. Well, it doesn't really work here, because we can push pawn to d4. Now, most guys are going to switch the targets for the knight on c6. Well, we can play this silly looking move, bishop captures on f5, which simply allows knight captures on c6, pawn recaptures, and then bishop forks our king and the rook. Well, we can just simply play king to f7 and let them capture the juicy rook, because after that, bishop to g4 kind of traps the queen. Well, I say kind of because in reality there is a way out of this for white and save the queen, but the position would be still losing for them. Anyways, for that line you're going to have to wait until my next video where I'll be covering this whole opening. And yeah, that's it for today, guys. Thanks for watching, have fun and stay safe.
And bye.